Hello, my sleepy heads. It's good to have you back on History for Sleep. In the following minutes, you will experience a deep state of relaxation. This story helps you to easily sleep through the night, so you can get up energized in the morning. Not only will you fall asleep faster, you will also get rid of disturbing thoughts. Listen to these history stories for at least 10 days for the best results. The longer you listen the video, the more likely you'll experience persistent and positive changes in the way you sleep. I wish you a great rest, and if you haven't already, we'd be very happy if you consider subscribing to the channel so you won't miss any new calming and relaxing history story. Tonight, we're going to slowly wander into the heart of the Forbidden City, a hidden world of emperors, empresses, and those who served them behind towering red walls. The Forbidden City, a vast palace complex of golden roofs and endless courtyards, where every stone carried the weight of ritual and every day unfolded like a carefully written scroll. Over the next couple of hours, we'll imagine what life was truly like within these guarded walls. The rhythm of the emperor's court, the quiet rivalries of the inner palace, the tireless duties of eunuchs and servants, and the silence of nights when the city seemed to breathe in secrecy. Before you get comfortable and let your mind drift into this forbidden city, I'd love it if you could take a gentle moment to like this video and subscribe. Only if these calm stories of the past bring you peace. Your support truly helps me grow and keep making these calm journey through time just for you. And in the comments, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always so wonderful to see our little community listening together from all corners of the world, quietly sharing these stories across space and time. So, settle in, take a slow breath, and let us step quietly into the Forbidden City, where every courtyard and corridor carries whispers of power, ritual, and hidden lives. Now let us begin. The day within the Forbidden City did not begin with the bustle of ordinary life, but with something quieter, more deliberate, as though time itself had been trained to move at a ceremonial pace. Before the first rays of sunlight gilded the curved golden roofs, the palace was already stirring in silence. Guards shifted at their posts, their breaths visible in the morning chill, while unseen hands prepared lanterns to be extinguished and corridors to be swept clean. The Forbidden City was no ordinary dwelling. It was the heart of an empire, a world contained within walls that stretched for miles, enclosing both splendor and secrecy. As the heavy wooden gates creaked open at dawn, they did not simply admit the light of day. They marked the beginning of a ritual, a renewal of order, a rhythm that had endured for centuries. Here, the rising sun was not just the start of another day. It was a sacred signal, a reminder that every movement within these walls carried meaning, and every gesture was woven into the delicate tapestry of imperial life. To awaken within the Forbidden City was to enter into a living dream, where nothing was accidental and everything belonged to a greater design. For those within its labyrinthine courtyards, awakening was not the casual, unstructured act it might be in a commoner's home. Each person had their place, their role, their duties to begin as the light grew across the glazed tiles. Servants rose quietly, their bare feet whispering against the stone floors as they moved to sweep courtyards, polish bronze vessels, and ready the incense burners for the day's rituals. Eunuchs, whose power lay in both service and influence, made their way through shadowed passages, carrying scrolls, lists, and orders that would direct the lives of hundreds before the morning was fully born. In the inner court, where the empress and concubines lived, attendants moved even more carefully, soft-spoken, measured, almost invisible, as though their silence could maintain the fragile harmony of palace life. To awaken here was not merely to open one's eyes, but to step onto a stage, already lit, where one's every act was part of a performance scripted by centuries of tradition. The very air of dawn seemed heavier, filled with expectation, with the weight of ritual, with the awareness that within these walls, even the smallest motion echoed with meaning. The emperor himself, the Son of Heaven, awoke not in solitude but surrounded by layers of ritual. His chambers, set deep within the inner palace, were attended with utmost care, for the emperor's awakening symbolized far more than one man rising from his rest. It symbolized the awakening of the empire itself. Courtiers and eunuchs awaited the signal of his stirring, for only once he rose could the day fully begin. The air in his chambers would be laced with the faint fragrance of sandalwood, prepared by attendants in the hour before dawn, while robes of silk embroidered with dragons rested folded and ready. Even the act of drinking water upon waking was ceremonial, the vessel presented with bowed heads and steady hands. Outside, ministers and officials began to gather, for the emperor's early audiences were matters of state that touched upon every province and every person in the empire. And so, while the first birds began to call from the eaves of golden roofs, the forbidden city shifted from shadow into light, with the emperor's awakening as its axis. Here, the dawn was not private. It was an event, layered with symbolism, steeped in order, and tied to the pulse of a nation that stretched far beyond the palace gates. As the first lights spilled into the vast courtyards, those within the forbidden city felt the immensity of the walls enclosing them. Rising high above, painted in deep vermilion and capped with tiles that gleamed like fire, the walls separated the palace from the waking streets of Beijing. Beyond them, commoners opened their shops, children ran along narrow alleys, and markets began to stir. But within the walls, life obeyed a different rhythm, untouched by the clamor of the city outside. Awakening here meant rising into silence broken only by the measured sounds of sweeping brooms, the call of watchmen announcing the hour, or the muffled rustle of silken robes. The courtyard stretched out in neat squares, vast yet ordered, designed to inspire awe and obedience in all who entered. The architecture itself guided the day, reminding those within that this was not a space for chance or chaos, but for harmony, reflection, and duty. To awaken inside these walls was to remember one's place within a carefully drawn order, to feel both the protection and the confinement of a city designed not only to house life, but to shape it. The Forbidden City at dawn carried a stillness that seemed timeless, as though centuries overlapped and brushed against each other in the cool morning air. A servant carrying water from a well might have mirrored the same motions of another servant 100 years earlier, and another yet 100 years before that. The rising of incense smoke in the emperor's hall looked as it had looked for countless mornings, curling upward like a whispered prayer. The sun striking the golden roof tiles gave the impression not of something new, but of something eternal, as though the palace itself had always been waiting for the light to return. This sense of continuity was no accident. It was built into the design of the city, into the rituals that greeted every dawn, into the very identity of the dynasty. To awaken within these walls was to be reminded that one's life was part of something vast, unchanging, and enduring. The weight of history pressed gently but firmly upon each new day, making even the simplest of actions feel both ancient and eternal. Yet beneath the surface of ritual and grandeur, there was also humanity. A young servant might stifle a yawn as she swept a courtyard, her hands red from the cold. A eunuch might pause for a heartbeat too long before delivering a message, remembering his own exhaustion from the night before. Even the emperor, veiled in symbols of divinity, was still a man who knew the heaviness of sleep and the first grogginess of waking. These moments, fleeting and often hidden, gave a softness to the rigid world of the Forbidden City. They were reminders that behind every layer of ritual lay the beating of ordinary human hearts, each one carrying its own quiet hopes and fears. To awaken here might mean stepping into a world of duty and order, but it also meant opening one's eyes to the tender details that made life, in all its grandeur and difficulty, something deeply human. As the day progressed from the hush of dawn into the clarity of morning, the Forbidden City revealed its living pulse. Ministers assembled for morning court, their rows stretching in solemn symmetry, each robe a wash of dark silk against the pale stone. Servants hurried unseen, their work never ending, but their presence barely acknowledged. Within the inner court, concubines and their attendants prepared for another day of delicate rituals and unspoken rivalries, their laughter and whispers hidden behind screens and latticed windows. The emperor, now fully immersed in matters of state, would read memorials, listen to petitions, and weigh decisions that affected the lives of millions. Yet, even as these great affairs unfolded, the Forbidden City retained its stillness, its sense that all was bound within a cycle that would repeat again tomorrow. Awakening here was not a single act, but the beginning of a pattern, one that would stretch until dusk drew its curtain once again. By mid-morning, the light fell fully across the palace, gilding every roof, warming every courtyard, and filling the Forbidden City with a sense of completeness. The gates that had opened at dawn now stood firmly shut against the outside world, and life within moved according to its own quiet logic. The awakening was finished, the rituals completed, the day fully underway. Yet the memory of dawn lingered, a fragile hour when the city seemed suspended between shadow and light, silence and sound, eternity and the present moment. To awaken within the forbidden city was to rise not only into a new day, but into a living symbol, a reminder that one's life was part of something vast, enduring, and deeply woven into the fabric of history. And as the palace settled into its steady rhythm, one could not help but feel that the true wonder of the Forbidden City was not found in its grand ceremonies or towering halls, but in the simple act of awakening within its walls, where every breath of morning carried with it the weight of centuries. To step deeper into the Forbidden City is to enter not merely a palace, but the carefully guarded world of the Emperor, the Son of Heaven, whose life was both exalted and confined. For those beyond the walls, the Emperor was a figure of near mythical stature, distant and divine, a man whose presence could not be gazed upon directly by the common eye. Within the palace, however, his existence was bound by ritual as precise as the gears of a clock. From the moment he rose, every breath, every gesture, every movement of his hand was watched, recorded, and layered with meaning. He did not belong entirely to himself, but to the empire, to the ancestors whose legacy he carried, and to the heavens that granted him his mandate. To imagine the emperor's world is to imagine a life at once unimaginably powerful and profoundly constrained, where the weight of responsibility pressed as heavily as the splendor of his surroundings. His days unfolded like a scroll unrolled with care, each detail predetermined, each act a link in the chain of dynastic continuity. The emperor's mornings began early, often before the sun fully crowned the horizon. Servants moved with reverence, readying his garments, preparing water for his ablutions, and laying out the robes that bore the golden dragon, the sacred emblem of imperial authority. Dressing the emperor was not a simple task, but a ritual in itself, performed by attendants who bowed at every stage, their hands steady and precise, as though touching not cloth but the very fabric of heaven's order. Once dressed, he was presented with food, simple at dawn, often rice or broth, sometimes delicately steamed buns, always prepared with attention to purity and balance. The act of eating was not private, for attendants stood nearby, recording his preferences, his appetite, even the pace of his meal. Nothing was unobserved, for the emperor's body was regarded as a symbol of the empire itself. His health mirrored the health of the realm, his strength the strength of the dynasty. To eat, to drink, even to breathe was to enact the cosmic role assigned to him, a role that no other man could share. After this morning ritual, the emperor turned to the heart of his duty, the daily audiences with ministers and officials. In vast halls, where sunlight filtered through latticed windows onto polished stone floors, rows of officials in dark robes stood in solemn silence, waiting for his presence. The Hall of Supreme Harmony and the Hall of Central Government were not simply buildings. They were theaters where the performance of governance unfolded. Here, the emperor listened to reports from distant provinces, weighed petitions, and issued edicts that would ripple across mountains and rivers, reaching farmers in distant fields and merchants in crowded markets. Yet even this exercise of power was ritualized. Officials spoke in prescribed forms, their bodies bent in deep bows, their words flowing in language that had been shaped by centuries of protocol. The emperor, though supreme, was not free to act on whim. He was bound by precedent, by ancestral expectations, by the invisible threads of tradition that guided every response. Power, within these walls, was immense but never unburdened. To outsiders, it may seem that the emperor's life was one of ease, surrounded by riches, attended by hundreds, and sheltered by walls of gold and red. Yet beneath the grandeur lay an endless cycle of responsibility that few could endure. The Son of Heaven was charged not only with governance, but with the maintenance of cosmic balance. His prayers, his offerings, his observance of ritual were believed to secure harmony between heaven and earth. A missed ceremony, an ill-omened dream, a natural disaster in the provinces, all could be seen as signs that the emperor had faltered in his sacred duty. Imagine the weight of such belief pressing upon a man who could never truly rest, for even in his solitude the empire seemed to lean upon his shoulders. To smile too easily, to grow weary too soon, to make a careless remark, each held consequences beyond the walls, rippling outward through a realm of millions. His splendor was his burden, and his confinement within the forbidden city was as real as that of the humblest servant who swept its stones. Yet within this weighty order, there were moments of intimacy, fleeting but human. The emperor's interactions with his family, his empress, his children, offered a glimpse of life unguarded, though still bound by ritual. Meals with the empress were carefully staged, yet laughter might still ripple softly behind carved screens. Children, though raised under the strict discipline of palace tutors, might find moments of play within gardens shaded by ancient cypresses. The emperor's hand, though often raised to sign edicts, might also rest gently upon the shoulder of a young prince or brush across the silk sleeve of his empress in quiet recognition. These moments, though hidden from the outside world, gave texture to a life otherwise dominated by ceremony. They reminded those within the forbidden city that even the Son of Heaven, exalted and enshrined, was still a man, capable of warmth and weariness, of affection and solitude. The emperor's afternoons often shifted between matters of governance and the rituals of culture. Scholars and advisors might read aloud from classical texts, their voices steady in the echoing chambers, while the emperor listened with a gaze that stretched beyond the present moment. Calligraphy, painting, or poetry might occupy a portion of his day, for these pursuits were not merely diversions but embodiments of refinement, expected of one who embodied the harmony of the realm. Each stroke of ink upon paper, each word chosen for a verse, was more than personal expression. It was a continuation of the dynasty's cultural lineage. To picture the emperor bent over a table, brush poised above paper, is to imagine a figure who held in his hand not only ink and parchment, but the continuity of an entire tradition. His artistry, like his governance, was both personal and symbolic, a reminder that the world within the Forbidden City was never entirely separate from the empire beyond. And yet, despite the splendor of halls and the elegance of rituals, the emperor lived within walls that both protected and confined him. The Forbidden City was designed to exalt him, but also to enclose him. Unlike commoners who could walk the bustling streets of Beijing, visit markets, or feel the open air of the countryside, the emperor's steps were measured, his world bounded by walls that stretched like an eternal horizon. He saw the sky above and the ordered gardens within, but rarely the untamed landscape of the empire he ruled. His knowledge of his realm came not from his own eyes, but from reports, maps, and words carried to him by others. The palace was both his throne and his prison, a place of immense beauty and suffocating enclosure. To live as emperor was to be revered as divine, yet to be cut off from the simplicity of ordinary life, a paradox as enduring as the walls themselves. As the day waned and shadows stretched across the courtyards, the emperor withdrew from the halls of governance, yet his role never truly ceased. Even in rest, he remained the son of heaven, his sleep guarded by watchful attendants, his dreams considered omens for the future. The weight of the empire followed him into silence, into candlelit chambers where the fragrance of incense lingered. His world was never his own. It was always entwined with the destiny of the dynasty, with the expectations of heaven, with the needs of countless subjects who would never see his face. To imagine the emperor's world is to imagine a life at once elevated beyond measure and deeply confined, a life gilded with splendor yet heavy with responsibility. Within the Forbidden City, his presence was the axis around which everything turned, and yet, like all who dwelled within its walls, he was both master and prisoner of the life the palace demanded. And so, the emperor's day closed as it had begun, in ritual, in silence, in the unending cycle of duty and destiny that defined his world. Beyond the grand halls of state and the emperor's daily audiences lay another world, hidden behind gates and latticed screens, the inner court. Here lived the women of the palace, the empress, concubines, ladies-in-waiting, and countless attendants who shaped the rhythm of life within these secluded quarters. The inner court was a place of elegance and stillness, where soft silks whispered against polished floors and lantern light cast gentle shadows across carved panels. Yet beneath this beauty lay layers of complexity. For life here was not simple nor entirely serene. Every smile, every glance, every spoken word carried weight, for these women lived under constant watch, bound by rules of propriety, by hierarchies of rank, and by the ever-present awareness of the emperor's gaze. To awaken in the inner court was to step into a delicate dance, one that blended ritual with rivalry, grace with caution. It was a world where outward tranquility concealed undercurrents of ambition and longing, where the harmony of daily rituals was balanced against the quiet storms of human desire. At the center of this intricate sphere stood the Empress, the official wife of the emperor, who held the highest authority among the women of the palace. Her chambers were richly adorned, yet her responsibilities extended far beyond personal comfort. The Empress was seen as the mother of the empire, responsible for overseeing the conduct of the palace women, ensuring rituals were properly observed, and maintaining harmony within the inner court. She was expected to embody dignity, wisdom, and restraint, qualities that reflected not only upon herself, but upon the emperor and the dynasty itself. To falter in these duties could mean disgrace not just for her, but for her entire family, whose fortunes rose and fell with her standing. Yet, for all her authority, the Empress lived within boundaries as strict as those of any servant. She was honored, revered, and obeyed, but she, too, was confined by walls that marked the limits of her freedom. Her world was one of responsibility woven with restraint, where even the most powerful woman in the empire was still a shadow beneath the golden roofs. Surrounding the empress were the concubines, women of varying ranks whose lives were shaped by both privilege and uncertainty. Chosen for their beauty, their refinement, or the political alliances their families offered, concubines lived within the palace not only as companions to the emperor, but as symbols of the empire's prosperity. Their days were filled with rituals of dress and appearance, with lessons in poetry, music, and calligraphy, all intended to please and to reflect refinement. Yet behind the graceful bow of a head or the delicate plucking of a lute string lay a life of competition. For favor was fleeting and attention could shift like a drifting cloud. A concubine might bask in the warmth of the emperor's notice one day, only to be forgotten the next, her place in the palace hierarchy slipping quietly away. To live as a concubine was to balance elegance with vigilance, to cloak ambition in serenity, and to endure the endless uncertainty of a life that belonged not fully to oneself, but to the tides of fortune. The inner court was alive with rituals, large and small, that governed the lives of these women. Each morning, attendants carefully arranged elaborate hairstyles, pinned with jade, pearls, or gold, while robes of embroidered silk were chosen according to rank and occasion. Meals, though often sumptuous, were served with ceremony, each dish recorded, each portion observed, for even the emperor's concubines were not free from scrutiny. Lessons in etiquette, music, and literature occupied long hours, reminding these women that their roles extended beyond companionship to the emperor. They were embodiments of cultural refinement, guardians of traditions that reached back centuries. Yet, within this beauty and order, moments of weariness often lingered. A concubine might long for the freedom of walking a city street or hearing the bustle of a market, things denied to her once she passed through the palace gates. For all its grandeur, the inner court could feel like a gilded cage, where the sound of laughter was softened by the weight of confinement. Rivalries, though rarely spoken aloud, thrummed beneath the surface of daily life. Each concubine knew that the emperor's favor could alter not only her standing but the fate of her family beyond the walls. A single gesture of kindness from him might elevate her relatives, secure wealth, or grant influence that would ripple across provinces. But favor was a fragile flame, easily extinguished. The slightest misstep, a word overheard, a jealous whisper, could lead to isolation or disgrace. Thus, the women of the inner court lived in a constant state of delicate balance, outwardly serene, inwardly watchful. Friendships existed, to be sure, with shared laughter during festivals or whispered confidences in the quiet of gardens, but trust was never absolute. Beneath every alliance lay the possibility of betrayal, for survival in the inner court was as much about endurance as about elegance. Amid this atmosphere of rivalry and ritual, the attendants played a vital role, often overlooked yet essential. These women, drawn from families of lesser rank, served the empress and concubines with devotion, tending to their daily needs, preparing robes, and assisting in the endless cycle of ceremonies. Though they lacked the status of the concubines, their proximity to the inner court gave them unique insight into its hidden world. They witnessed the triumphs and heartbreaks of their mistresses, carried messages across courtyards, and guarded secrets with their silence. Their lives, too, were bound by the walls of the palace, yet they moved through it with a quiet resilience, their service forming the unseen fabric that held the inner court together. Without them, the daily rhythm of the palace would have faltered. To imagine their world is to imagine countless small acts of labor, sewing, sweeping, fetching, carrying, woven into a tapestry of devotion and invisibility. Despite the rivalries and restrictions, the inner court was not without moments of joy and beauty. Festivals brought splashes of color and music into the secluded gardens, with lanterns glowing against the night sky and laughter echoing softly through the air. Poetry contests, musical performances, and shared meals offered respites from the quiet tension, allowing the women to revel in the artistry and refinement for which they had been trained. Within the shaded corridors and flowering courtyards, friendships sometimes deepened, and bonds of loyalty were formed in the quiet hours away from the emperor's gaze. Even within confinement, life carried its own rhythms of tenderness and grace, reminding all who dwelled there that human spirit could find light even in the most shadowed corners. These moments, fleeting yet precious, softened the rigid structures of palace life, allowing warmth to linger within walls that so often felt cold with formality. As night fell upon the forbidden city, the inner court grew hushed, its lanterns glowing like stars scattered across courtyards of stone. The empress retreated to her chambers, her day of duties complete, while the concubines withdrew behind screens embroidered with silk dragons and phoenixes. Attendants folded robes, extinguished lamps, and whispered last words before silence settled. Yet beneath the stillness, thoughts stirred, of favor sought, of dreams deferred, of families remembered beyond the palace gates. The women of the inner court lived lives both elevated and enclosed, marked by beauty and shadow in equal measure. To imagine their world is to imagine a delicate tapestry woven from threads of ritual, ambition, and quiet longing. They were the hidden half of the forbidden city, unseen by the outside world, yet essential to its life, shaping its rhythm with their presence. And so, as the palace slept, their stories lingered in the air, silent but enduring. Part of the great dream that unfolded within those timeless walls. Beneath the polished courtyards and towering halls of the Forbidden City existed an unseen force, one that gave life to the vast machinery of the palace. Servants and eunuchs, often overlooked in the sweeping grandeur of imperial history, formed the living foundation of this world. Without their labor, their whispers, their constant presence, the daily rhythms of the emperor's realm would have faltered. From the first moments of dawn to the quiet hours of nightfall, they moved silently through corridors, carrying water, lighting lanterns, arranging documents, and preparing meals. Yet, though their tasks seemed menial, their presence reached far deeper. For these men and women, bound by duty and silence, were both witnesses and participants in the flow of power within the Forbidden City. They were the threads that tied together the emperor, the women of the inner court, and the officials of the outer court, weaving the hidden fabric of imperial life. At the heart of this intricate system stood the eunuchs, men who, through sacrifice, had gained access to the most private spaces of the palace. Unlike scholars or ministers, eunuchs did not rise through examinations or family connections, but through service and proximity. They alone were permitted to move between the emperor's chambers and the women of the inner court, trusted to serve in roles that others could not. Their lives were marked by hardship, for their entry into palace service often meant the severing of family ties and the loss of ordinary life. Yet, within the walls of the Forbidden City, they found a strange kind of power. A favored eunuch could become the emperor's confidant, his messenger, his gatekeeper. Whispers of the emperor's moods, secrets of court life, and decisions that shaped the empire often passed first through the hands of eunuchs. They stood at the intersection of trust and suspicion, indispensable yet always watched. The role of eunuchs was as varied as the palace itself. Some managed kitchens, overseeing the preparation of elaborate banquets where each dish was recorded and tasted for safety. Others tended to the emperor's wardrobe, ensuring robes of state were flawless, embroidered with dragons in perfect symmetry. Many guarded entrances, checking passes, and watching who came and went, while still others carried messages between the inner and outer courts. At the highest levels, certain eunuchs wielded influence so vast it rivaled that of ministers, guiding imperial decisions through subtle words and gestures. But such power was precarious. History records both the rise of eunuchs to positions of immense authority and their sudden, brutal downfall when suspicion grew too great. To live as a eunuch was to walk a narrow path, trusted with intimacy, burdened with secrecy, and always aware of the fragile nature of favor. Servants, too, formed an indispensable part of the palace life. These men and women, drawn from humble families, performed countless tasks that kept the Forbidden City running smoothly. They swept courtyards before dawn, polished the great bronze vessels that lined the halls, and carried water from cisterns to the kitchens and baths. In winter, they ensured braziers glowed with warmth, and in summer, they fanned the emperor's chambers with woven screens. Though their lives lacked the intrigue of concubines or eunuchs, they lived under the same strict discipline, confined by rules that allowed little freedom. Their faces might never be remembered, yet their hands touched every corner of the palace. Each act of service, folding silk robes, preparing ink for an imperial decree, lighting the lamps at dusk, was a quiet thread in the vast web of ritual that defined life within the Forbidden City. Life for these servants was not without its burdens. The palace was both their workplace and their prison, for few could leave once they entered its gates. Families remained outside, voices and laughter lost beyond walls that seemed to stretch endlessly. Long hours of work blurred into one another, days marked by the rhythm of tasks rather than seasons. And yet, within this routine, small moments of humanity flickered. A servant might pause to admire plum blossoms in a courtyard or whisper a joke to a companion while carrying trays of porcelain. Bonds were formed in these quiet moments, fragile yet enduring, offering comfort within a world ruled by silence. To imagine their lives is to see the palace not just as a stage for emperors and courtiers, but as a living body, sustained by countless small, unseen acts of labor. The machinery of power within the Forbidden City depended not only on ceremony, but also on these hidden hands. Eunuchs and servants alike became the quiet bridges between worlds. When ministers presented petitions in the outer court, eunuchs carried them inward, deciding which documents reached the emperor swiftly and which languished. When the empress or concubines prepared gifts, it was attendants and eunuchs who ensured they arrived with care. Even the emperor himself, surrounded by grandeur, relied on these individuals for the simplest of tasks: clothing, meals, messages, comforts. This dependence gave rise to an unusual form of influence, subtle yet real. Those who carried whispers could shape how the emperor perceived the world, while those who performed rituals of care ensured the image of imperial majesty never faltered. But life in such proximity to power was fraught with danger. A misplaced word, a rumor of corruption, or the envy of rivals could end a eunuch's rise in an instant. Many eunuchs endured harsh punishments, and some were cast aside when trust dissolved. The same was true of servants, who could be dismissed or punished for the smallest mistake. Yet, despite the risks, countless people sought entry into this hidden world, for service in the palace offered the possibility of advancement, however narrow. A trusted eunuch might see his family elevated in status, while a diligent servant could secure opportunities for younger relatives. Within the confinement of the palace walls, ambition still burned, flickering quietly beneath the rituals of obedience. As the day drew to its end, and lanterns glowed across the palace, the servants and eunuchs remained ever watchful. They tended to the emperor's nighttime chambers, carried messages into shadowed corridors, and ensured that silence lay across the forbidden city like a protective veil. While officials and concubines retreated to their quarters, these laborers continued their tasks, unseen but essential, their footsteps echoing softly against stone. In their tireless service lay the hidden machinery of power, the invisible force that sustained the grandeur of emperors and the dignity of rituals. To drift into their world is to see beyond the golden roofs and painted halls, into the quiet labor that made the palace breathe. It is to remember that behind every spectacle of empire lay hands worn by work, voices hushed by duty, and lives lived in the shadow of greatness. Within the Forbidden City, life was not simply measured by the rising and setting of the sun, but by the steady rhythm of ritual. Each day unfolded according to traditions that stretched back centuries, woven into the fabric of imperial rule. Morning audiences, offerings at shrines, meals prepared with exacting care. Each act was a performance, a reflection of order that mirrored the cosmos itself. The emperor, as the son of heaven, stood at the center of this great cycle, his presence ensuring the balance between heaven and earth. Yet it was not only the emperor who lived by ritual. From the smallest servant who lit incense at dawn to the highest official presenting memorials at court, all were bound to this rhythm. The Forbidden City was, in essence, a living calendar, its courtyards echoing with ceremonies that reminded every inhabitant of their place in the hierarchy of the world. Beyond the daily rituals lay the grandeur of seasonal festivals, moments when the palace seemed to breathe with a different kind of life. The Chinese New Year was one such time, when red banners fluttered, lanterns glowed across the courtyards, and offerings were made to ancestors and gods. For the emperor, this was not merely celebration, but duty. He performed sacrifices to ensure prosperity for the empire, his every gesture watched by courtiers and recorded by scribes. Eunuchs bustled to prepare feasts, concubines embroidered garments of luck, and servants decorated halls with evergreen branches. Yet, amidst the solemnity of ritual, laughter echoed, music drifted from pavilions, and the Forbidden City felt less like a fortress of power and more like a home warmed by firelight and festivity. The Lantern Festival, held at the close of New Year's celebrations, transformed the Forbidden City into a sea of light. Paper lanterns, painted with dragons, phoenixes, and scenes of nature, glowed softly against the night sky. In the inner court, concubines and attendants released lanterns upon pools, their reflections shimmering like stars upon water. In the outer court, officials gathered in stately halls, their conversations illuminated by the flickering glow. For the emperor, even this moment of beauty was a reminder of his role, for he was expected to embody wisdom as radiant as the lanterns themselves. Yet for the ordinary servant or eunuch, it was a rare chance to pause, to marvel at light chasing away the darkness, and to feel, if only briefly, part of something larger than their daily toil. Another festival, rich with symbolism, was the Mid-Autumn celebration. On this night, the moon shone high and full, casting silver light across the golden roofs of the palace. Mooncakes, carefully prepared and shared, carried wishes of unity and longevity. In the emperor's court, the festival symbolized harmony between ruler and ruled, a celestial reminder of balance. Concubines would gaze at the moon from balconies, reciting poetry, while eunuchs carried trays of tea and fruit. For those who lived within the palace walls, separated from families far beyond the gates, this night often stirred feelings of longing. The moon, round and whole, was seen by everyone in the empire, a bridge of light connecting those inside the forbidden city with loved ones beyond. In this way, ritual was not only duty but solace, a way of touching what lay outside, even when walls confined the body. Ritual also marked the emperor's most sacred duties, sacrifices at the altars that lay just beyond the forbidden city. Though physically outside the palace walls, these ceremonies were rooted in the palace's daily rhythm, for preparations began long in advance. The emperor fasted, purified himself, and dressed in garments of deep symbolism. Courtiers, eunuchs, and servants all played their parts, ensuring each detail was perfect. These sacrifices, made to heaven, earth, and ancestors, were believed to sustain the very mandate that granted the emperor his rule. Without them, harmony might falter, and disorder could descend. Thus, even the grandest rituals were bound to the forbidden city, for it was here they were envisioned, rehearsed, and recorded. For those within its walls, the knowledge that the empire's fate rested upon these acts lent weight to their every movement, their every whisper of preparation. Yet it was not only great festivals or sacred sacrifices that shaped palace life. Countless smaller ceremonies unfolded quietly, almost unnoticed by the wider world. The emperor's daily meals, presented with precise order, were rituals in themselves, each dish chosen for its meaning as well as its flavor. Birthdays of the emperor, empress, or favored consorts became occasions of celebration, marked by poetry, music, and gifts. Even the act of lighting incense before the ancestors each morning was ritual, a humble yet powerful gesture that bound the living to the dead. These small acts gave shape to the days, reminding all who lived within the palace that they were part of a greater order, one that extended beyond themselves into eternity. For the women of the inner court, rituals carried a more personal weight. Promotions, titles, and ceremonies marked their place in the hierarchy, while festivals offered moments of display where beauty, poetry, and grace could catch the emperor's eye. Eunuchs managed these events with precision, ensuring that each concubine's attire and presence followed strict rules. Yet behind the shimmering robes and delicate gestures lay an undercurrent of tension, for rituals could elevate one woman while obscuring another. In the stillness of lantern-lit evenings, Concubines might whisper prayers that their fortunes would rise with the next festival, or that the emperor's glance might linger a little longer. For them, the rhythm of palace ritual was both opportunity and reminder of the fragile thread upon which their lives balanced. As night descended and the palace lanterns burned low, rituals gave way once more to silence. The forbidden city seemed to sleep, yet even in its stillness, the rhythm of tradition continued. Guards patrolled in measured steps, eunuchs whispered instructions for the next day, and incense lingered in the air like a memory of devotion. To live within the forbidden city was to surrender to this endless cycle of ceremony, where every gesture had meaning and every day was shaped by patterns older than memory. And as we drift with them into the hush of night, we see the forbidden city not only as a palace of power, but as a world of ritual, a place where life itself was a sacred performance, unfolding softly beneath golden roofs and the watchful gaze of heaven. And so, our quiet walk through the forbidden city comes to an end. Together, we have awakened with the first light upon its courtyards, stepped into the world of the emperor, listened to the whispers of the inner court, watched the tireless work of eunuchs and servants, and drifted through the rituals and festivals that gave life its rhythm. Behind golden roofs and crimson gates, we have glimpsed not only the grandeur of emperors, but also the humanity of those who lived in their shadow. Servants carrying water, concubines whispering prayers, eunuchs balancing trust and suspicion. The palace, though mighty, was kept alive by fragile, human hands, by small acts repeated across centuries, until they became part of its very breath. Now, as the lanterns fade and silence settles across the halls, let us leave this world behind with the same gentleness with which we entered. May the memory of still courtyards, flickering candles, and the quiet steps of servants remain with you only as a soft echo, easing you deeper into rest. Close your eyes. Let the palace walls dissolve into dream, and allow sleep to carry you gently, like moonlight spilling over rooftops. Good night.